Good evening. Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Pauline Verzosa.
Tonight's big stories. Officials insist we have not lost Espada Shoal, even after the BRP Teresa Magbanua had to be pulled out earlier than expected. Coast Guard personnel aboard it were dehydrated and were forced to drink rainwater and aircon condensation at one point.
Well, amidst the Philippines standoff with China, Germany sends one of its Navy frigates to Manila as part of its commitment to uphold UNCLOS. This is the first time in over 20 years that a German Navy vessel has docked here.
And President Bongbong Marcos becomes emotional and says he feels a deep sense of shame over the rampant sexual abuse of Filipino children online and vows to intensify efforts against child exploitation.
Our big story tonight, the BRP Teresa Magbanua was returned to port after nearly 5 months in station at Escoda Shoal.
This comes just days after the latest round of talks between the Philippines and China, where the Chinese reiterated their position that they want the ship out of Escoda Shoal.
Now, why did the Magbanua have to leave and what will happen to the currently unguarded shoal? Maricel Halili has this report.
Maintain continued presence in Escoda Shoal. This was President Bongbong Marcos's latest instruction after the BRP Teresa Magbanua left its post in the shoal after patrolling for nearly 5 months in the area.
Ang directive ni Pangulo ay i-maintain natin yung ating presence. Pag sinabing presence, strategic presence yun, hindi lang physical presence. I just want to make clear of that, na hindi yung presence natin magpapadala tayo sa barko, hindi yun.
Days before the Teresa Magbanua returned to Palawan, Chinese officials reiterated their position during the second bilateral consultation mechanism meeting that they want the Magbanua out of the Escoda Shoal. Did the Philippines capitulate to China then?
We have not lost anything. We did not abandon anything. Escoda Shoal is still part of our exclusive economic zone. We can deploy vessels anytime we like. We can go there anytime we like.
We did not withdraw. And hindi rin ito yung naging nakasunduan during the last BCM. Baka akala kasi ng ating kababayan ay bumigay tayo, no? In fact, hindi. Nagmatigas tayo during the meeting sa Beijing. Our DFA stated that our presence will be maintained in the shoal. So it's not a withdrawal.
Tariela said the commandant decided to retreat to attend to the medical needs of some troops and due to bad weather, which he says the Chinese ships also had to contend with.
Kung anong pinagdaanan natin, yun din ang pinagdadaanan nila. Regarding sa malalaking alon, malakas na hangin, malakas na buhos ng ulan, this is the same thing that they have experienced.
Lopez also stressed that pulling out BRP Teresa Magbanua is not cause for concern. The government, he says, has other means to monitor Escoda Shoal, which is as big as the cities of Caloocan, Navotas, Malabon, and Manila combined. In his statement announcing the Magbanua's return to port, Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin called it mission accomplished, because the ship, quote-unquote, challenged an encirclement by a larger flotilla of intruders and battled inclement weather, with her crew surviving on diminished daily provisions. But for defense analyst Jose Custodio, there's a danger in leaving Escoda Shoal unguarded.
If it's part of a replacement process, it shouldn't be a problem sa atin, no? That is important, because if not, it will repeat the mistakes of Scarborough Shoal, wherein the Pinoy administration withdrew the vessel thinking that the Chinese would act in good faith. Instead, the Chinese stayed permanently na, and they've been there since 2012.
The reclamation would take 4 years. Kung mawala ba tayo ng isang araw, 2 araw, 3 araw, isang linggo, makagawa na sila ng runway, right? It doesn't go that way.
Based on the latest monitoring by the Philippine Coast Guard, there are 11 Chinese militia vessels at Escoda Shoal. And following the president's directive, the PCG says the BRP Teresa Magbanua's replacement is already on its way to the shoal. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Now, just how dire was the situation of Philippine Coast Guard personnel aboard BRP Teresa Magbanua that the vessel had to be pulled out to save them? Brian Basa tells us in this report.
Exhausted, but Lieutenant Commander Efren Duran could still afford to smile. After 5 months of the daunting task of keeping watch on Escoda Shoal, it's only now that he can have a proper meal and sleep. He recounts life at sea aboard the BRP Teresa Magbanua. They were 63 personnel in total, assigned to monitor activities in Sabina or Escoda Shoal since April. Duran saw everything 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including that time a China Coast Guard vessel rammed the BRP Teresa Magbanua multiple times on a Saturday, August 31st. Before and after that incident, tension was thick around disputed waters, with Chinese ships watching their every move. Aside from that, provisions were running out. Food and water became harder to come by the longer they anchored, with Beijing blocking resupply missions in Escoda. The result, many from the crew became dehydrated. But ingenuity is a skill every PCG personnel has learned. When their only desalinator that converts salt water to drinking water did not work, they resorted to drinking rainwater or water coming out of their air conditioning unit.
So para siyang distilled water kasi parang moist siya, dadaan siya sa filter. Dahil doon sa moist na yon at nag-create kami ng tubig is nakaka-produce kami ng tubig ng siguro mga 4 na bote na pang-inom sa loob ng 24 hours.
When the vessel returned to port in Palawan on Sunday, at least 2 personnel had to be carried out on stretchers. Others had complained of stomach pain and arthritis. Still, knowing what they know now about how high the stakes are for the Philippines, the PCG is getting ready for another long mission at sea. It has bought more desalinators, and the BRP Teresa Magbanua will be refurbished.
Pag binigyan ako ng order na mag-deploy ulit, larga kami ulit, sir.
For now, Lieutenant Commander Efren Duran and his troop will take a well-deserved rest, but not for long. Despite their ordeal, PCG personnel are willing to secure Escoda Shoal one more time, even if it means facing their aggressors all over again.
Proud kami, sir, na kahit mag-isa lang kami doon kasi hindi naman namin sila pinoprovoke. So, nagtatrabaho lang kami doon. Walang mga aggression kaming ginawa sa kanila.
Aboard the BRP Teresa Magbanua in Puerto Princesa City, Palawan. For News 5, I'm Brian Basa, and we are One News.
The country's allies are certainly making themselves heard over this issue. For the first time in more than 20 years, 2 German Navy ships have sailed to Manila for a port of call. The German frigate Baden-Württemberg and the replenishment ship Frankfurt Aman are docked in Manila Harbor as we speak as part of their Indo-Pacific deployment this year. They will be here until Thursday, September 19. Both vessels have just passed through the Taiwan Strait, and China has since accused Berlin of heightening security risks in the region. In a post on X, German Ambassador Andreas Pfaffernosch said the ship's presence here underscores one important thing, that Germany is ready to stand up for UNCLOS, for international law, and to uphold the right to free navigation. He says it also underlines Germany's commitment to a stronger security engagement in the Indo-Pacific.
Good morning, everyone. I'm standing in Pier 15 in Manila Port, and behind me you see the German frigate Baden-Württemberg coming to Manila for the first time in the framework of the Indo-Pacific deployment of the German Navy. This is our strong commitment to the international rules-based order and our solidarity with our Filipino friends. So mabuhay, welcome to Baden-Württemberg and her crew.
Well, what does it mean that the Magbanua had to leave Escoda? Let's try to get some answers. We have with us tonight Maritime security expert Ray Powell. He is, of course, also the director of Sea Light, a maritime transparency project of the Gordon Yacht Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University. Ray joins us live via Zoom. Hi, Ray. How are you?
Hi, Eugene. How are you?
First thing I want to say is thank you for dragging yourself out of bed at this ungodly hour. You're on the West Coast, so it's just past 5 in the morning your time there, so thank you for that. It's a very important day, and we do need your insights. We're talking about the Teresa Magbanua, of course. First off, what was your reaction when you heard that it was getting recalled? Did you anticipate this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It was never going to be tenable over the long term once China decided to really aggressively contest it. So, the issue that the Philippines had at Escoda Shoal was simply one of mass. The Chinese are able to send dozens of ships, as you have seen already in the past, to essentially quarantine the Teresa Magbanua, excuse me. And again, as they experienced, actually getting a ship through a determined quarantine is almost impossible.
The officials are obviously all taking pains to insist that we have not lost anything at this point, that no feature has been lost, that this isn't a capitulation to China. Bearing in mind, though, that all these features we're talking about are well within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. But what do you think? Have we lost
Well, I mean,
anything?
I think you have to start with the question of did the Philippines really sort of have Escoda Shoal to begin with? There was one ship out there. There were dozens of Chinese ships. It was sort of a random engagement in a lot of ways. The Teresa Magbanua did not go out there to claim the shoal. It was already a Philippine shoal. It was already within the Philippine EZ. It went out there ostensibly to keep an eye on China because of the suspected reclamation activities in the dumping of the coral. So I don't know that Manila really expected such a rash and sort of over-the-top Chinese response to an anchoring. But China framed the whole thing almost in terms of as if it was a second Sierra Madre. There are all this weird language about a quasi grounding, and that there was clear concern that for some reason the Philippines would take one of its newest, largest, most modern ships and ground it at Escoda Shoal. That was never realistic, but that was the way China reacted. And so, this was one of those things that sort of happened. I don't think either side never ever really expected. China used it as a pretext to escalate.
Can you give us an oversight of what was happening around Escoda Shoal when the Philippine government decided to bring the BRP Teresa Magbanua in that area? I mean, to have it there for about 5 months, you kind of understand where China is coming from, that they're paranoid or they would tighten their grip over Escoda. Did we see an escalation in terms of the number of ships prior to the BRP Teresa Magbanua staying there? What was it like?
Absolutely. Yeah. Up until then, China had mostly just kept their what we call their Spratly backbone vessels. So this is the slightly smaller militia ships that don't really take an active part in China's enforcement. They would just raft themselves together. Basically, they tie their ships together and just sit there for months on end. So the Philippines, of course, had sent out some marine scientists to look at the shoals. And when we talk about the shoal, remembering that, as your report indicated, it's a massive area, and it's actually a whole number of individual shoals. So, the Philippines had taken a look at some of those and saw some things that, this dumped dead coral that indicated that maybe China was trying to raise the level of the shoals with some idea of sort of building a case in the future that it was actual territory that was China's. And so the Philippines was concerned about that when it sent out the Teresa Magbanua in April. And so that was when China's reaction began to really ramp up. And again, I think it took a lot of us by surprise how extremely China reacted to that. It was, they constantly used this grounding terminology, which was ridiculous. There's no indication that the Philippines wanted to ground one of its newest ships. It's not a World War II ship like the BRP Sierra Madre. So, but China reacted as if it was. And once they did so, they almost couldn't back down because they ramped up the rhetoric to such a degree that, that was what sort of made Escoda Shoal into this huge issue.
Help us understand the importance of Escoda Shoal. I know that you passed by it on the way to Second Thomas Shoal, or Ayungin as we call it. It is also on the way to Mischief Reef. But tell us a little bit more, because I think I read something that it wasn't even included in the arbitral award. It wasn't mentioned specifically. And now this is a new flashpoint.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the arbitral award makes no mention of it at all, and because it wasn't an issue. In fact, so I had you know Greg Polling from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative. I had him on our podcast not very long ago, and he called it a random reef in the middle of a whole bunch of random reefs. There's nothing specifically interesting about it. I mean, of course, it's closer to Palawan than some of the other places. It's not a big fishing ground like Scarborough Shoal. It doesn't have a Philippine outpost on it like Ayungin Shoal. So it is kind of, you know, it was kind of sort of an accidental confrontation over a relatively insignificant piece of, you know, West Philippine Sea oceanography. I mean, there's just not that much that's interesting about it. Except for the fact that the Teresa Magbanua, once it anchored there, generated this huge Chinese response.
I did listen to part of that podcast where he had Greg Polling on, and one other thing that he said that was interesting to me was that he doesn't believe that there's legal land reclamation going on, and he says there's no evidence of it. Is that the case, do you think?
Well, so all there is essentially this dumped coral, right? And to this day, I don't think anybody knows why it's there. You know, it may be, and in fact, you know, sort of this would be my guess, and it's just a guess, that perhaps China was dumping coral there just as an effort to raise the level of the reef so that sometime in the future they could claim it as territory. They are now using the term territory to explain it, and that's important to China because in their narrative, this is a territorial dispute. So this brings it to, you know, if it is a territorial dispute, then it's like on the level of Scarborough Shoal, which because it is under international law considered a, quote, rock, that is legally territory so that it can have its own territorial sea. And that sort of, again, it just sort of elevates it a little bit in their lawfare. So that may be what they were doing. Of course, if they were doing that, it wouldn't mean much today because you're not supposed to be able to change the legal standing of any feature in the South China Sea simply by you know, raising its level artificially. But you know, that doesn't really matter within China's internal narrative, which they use quite aggressively. So that's one big thing that we've seen change over the last several months is China begin to refer to Sabina Shoal, Escoda Shoal, Xianbinjiao, as they call it, as their territory.
Well, Ray, the national government is planning to deploy other vessels to replace Teresa Magbanua. We're not sure if that's a single vessel or multiple vessels. But what do you think China's reaction will be to this?
So thanks, Pauline. It's hard to say. There's no reason for them to, you know, react as strongly as they did before now that the Teresa Magbanua is gone. But of course, they may react, concerned that there will be another Teresa Magbanua, there will be another ship anchored there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do try to keep any ships out of the shoal. Now that's a hard task, as Commodore Tariela mentioned in his comments. Sabina Shoal, and again, your story indicated this, Sabina Shoal is huge. So they do have to, basically patrol a very, very large area. And it's not like Scarborough Shoal or Ayungin Shoal where there's only one entrance. As your pictures show, this is just a whole series of individual shoals. There are many, many, many ways to get in and out of the internal part of this feature. And so if the Philippines, wants to try to sneak something in and anchor it there, it's easier to do than it would be in one of these other places. But I mean, so China's going to have its hands full trying to keep Philippine ships out. But I would expect them to try, at least in the near term.
One question that's been raised, though, is why didn't the Philippines just ask the United States or any of the other allies for help to escort, for instance, the resupply missions to the Teresa Magbanua? Indo-Pacific Commander Samuel Paparo was here just a few weeks ago. And in fact, when he was here, he reiterated that the United States stands ready to assist the resupply missions, although the AFP at that time, kind of held back and said, they're okay to do it themselves for now. What are we missing here? Was that a good strategy?
Well, if they didn't want to do it before for Ionian Shoal, then this wouldn't seem to be the time, for one thing, of course, the Teresa Magbanua, unlike the Sierra Madre, Teresa Magbanua could and did eventually weigh anchor and leave. And so it's not like there were no options. And as I mentioned, this isn't a especially consequential battle, if you will. It's a gray zone battle, but it's a battle nonetheless. It's not an especially consequential one, except for symbolically. So we're all talking about it today because the Teresa Magbanua went out and then left. That's really the only reason we're talking about it. So it's a bit of a different situation, and I don't think if some of these other situations didn't lead to a U.S. escort, then it's hard to see why this one would.
Ray, to be honest, it does feel that we just gave China a reason to escalate over the Escoda Shoal and to have a tighter grip to show their force. And it does, I think, reveal the vulnerability between the Philippine-American relations, don't you think?
Well, let me take the first part of that first, Gretchen, that, China looks for pretexts to escalate all the time. So if they have an opportunity to escalate and then normalize a new level of aggression, they'll take it. And then what that does is it shocks the system at first, but then lesser aggressions now become more normal, right? And we stop paying attention to them. So almost nobody talks about intrusive patrols anymore because they're so normal that they're just one more thing to talk about. So, because each time that China escalates, now we've got this new escalation to talk about, and now that seems like sort of the top, that seems like the reportable thing. So, pretext to escalate, it's one of those things that I think that every country has to be aware that China is always looking for this. And it's a very hard thing to sort of combat because it's an information warfare tactic. They're actually trying to take control of the narrative. So, in some ways, this is one of those things that you just have to sort of call it out when you see it and remind people that none of these escalations are acceptable. They're all an offense to the international order, which is why you see Germany showing up. What business, if you will, and I'm sure China asks this question all the time, what business does Germany have in this part of the world when they've got an active war going on in their part of the world? Well, Germany is deeply, deeply invested in the international order and uses, and to them, any sort of transgression that violates the international order is worthy of their attention. And so they've done a Taiwan Strait transit, and now they're docked in Manila.
When you say this is not an especially consequential feature, then does that also mean then that the prevailing narrative that the Philippines has lost another feature in the West Philippine Sea is incorrect? Can we say that outright now?
I mean, I think it doesn't strike true to me. Again, as I mentioned from the top, it's not like the Philippines sort of had the feature to lose it. It's not like the Philippines had an outpost there. It's not like the Philippines had a strong presence there before. What happened was they sent us, the Philippines sent a single ship to Escoda Shoal to do some monitoring, and that ship was eventually sort of compelled to redeploy. So, China has effectively taken control of Escoda Shoal. Whether they want to maintain control is another question. And again, why would they want to maintain control of Escoda Shoal as opposed to any other particular reef or shoal? I mean, there are dozens of these, right? They could sort of decide on any of these uninhabited, unoccupied reefs or shoals. They have the mass to be able to do this wherever they want. It just happened to be Escoda. So how much energy, how many resources are they willing to expend to sort of take this symbolic shoal, if you will? And it's only become symbolic because of the activities of the last 5 months. So, I guess I have a hard time with the term that it's been lost because I don't know that it was ever necessarily found.
I suppose at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we think, how we interpret it. The question at the end of the day is how China is going to see it, how they'll be pushing that narrative. Already, I believe there's been a statement I don't know if it's in direct reaction to the Magbanua being pulled out, but there's a statement, part of which says that they have indisputable sovereignty over Sabina, or Jianbinjiao, as they call it. How do you think they might see it, and how might that change their strategy moving forward?
Well, indisputable sovereignty is one of those fun terms that we are now seeing all the time, right? Anytime that there's any kind of West Philippine Sea interaction between China and the Philippines, the term indisputable sovereignty comes up. And it's usually indisputable sovereignty of fill in the blank feature and, quote, relevant waters or adjacent waters, which is a very inexact term, which means whatever they want it to mean at any given time. So this is part of their narrative warfare, and they're trying to, once again, normalize this idea that no serious entity or individual or country disputes China's sovereignty. And of course, everybody disputes China's sovereignty, or some more loudly than others. Some more, some ASEAN countries try to sort of pull their punches and are more muted, but they all dispute China's sovereignty. But China is using this narrative as a part of a long-term narrative warfare strategy to sort of shout down anyone who would dare to oppose them. And so that's how, again, Escoda Shoal has become a great symbolic fight, much more than a consequential strategic or military or even operational fight.
I forgot to ask this at the top. Give us some context into that whole 5 months timeline, though. Was that longer? Some officials we've spoken to are saying that the vessel was pulled earlier than expected, but 5 months to me sounds a little bit of that's a long time, isn't it? I mean,
it's a pretty long time. I mean, when China sends its Coast Guard ships out on patrols, they usually go out for 45 days. So it is a long time to be out to sea. And again, ships have to be maintained, even if you don't run out of water, which is what happened. You can run out of a lot of other things, and your ship can begin to wear down, and you can't do everything. You can't resupply maintenance tasks. Eventually you have to get back to port. So this was always going to be a problem at some point. The ship could not stay there indefinitely. So it is a long time. And much longer than most Coast Guard ships go to sea. Now, it was able to stay out there so long because mostly it was just anchored. It wasn't using fuel, for example. It was just sitting there. But it's still a long time to be out to sea. And, eventually, I think what the Philippines ran into was the combination of the sort of the blockade and bad weather, because, bad weather means you might not be able to bring in a helicopter even. So, if you need water, you can bring that in by helicopter. But if the helicopter can't land because of bad weather, then you're kind of out of options.
Given the location of the Escoda Shoal on its way to Ayungin, this will definitely challenge future resupply missions to the BRP Sierra Madre. And it kind of baffles me also how we can have a different situation over at Escoda compared to Ayungin Shoal, where we have a provisional agreement. I mean, what's changing here in terms of Chinese tactic?
So I think the fact that the Teresa Magbanua could and did eventually sail away helps explain that, right? So the thing about the Sierra Madre is China recognizes that in the end, the only option for the Philippines is to, if they can't actually resupply the Sierra Madre, then people actually start dying, right? Because there's no way for them to get food, water, things that they actually have, medical care. And in fact, you've seen these medical missions erupt into confrontations in the past recently. And so I think what China recognized is, if it wasn't willing to essentially lay siege to the Sierra Madre and force people to choose between essentially their own lives and some kind of arrangement, then they needed to make an arrangement, or else that would become an extremely bad scene. Whereas with the Teresa Magbanua, they could always just look at the Philippines and say, look, there's the door. You can leave anytime you want. We're not going to stop you from leaving. And so, that's something that obviously the Sierra Madre, as a grounded vessel that is not seaworthy, can't do.
That's interesting. So I think maybe the narrative is not that the Magbanua was recalled much earlier than expected, but that actually it's been out there much longer than normal, right? 45 days is what you were saying.
Yeah, I don't know that they expected to be out there for 5 months. Honestly, I mean, it was, once again, it was in a lot of ways, this was an accidental confrontation. I'm not sure anybody expected to see this level of a Chinese response to its deployment. Again, it didn't feel like an especially threatening thing for it to go out there and drop anchor. But once China ramped up its rhetoric and its quarantine, then that's where we ended up.
Well, that's what people are saying, that the risk of accidental confrontation is a lot higher now with all of these features. Did you have one last question?
No, to be honest, it feels like taking a look at if you compare it to playing chess, we tried to move and we were cornered there, and we had to put our piece back. That's what it feels like the Philippine government experimenting on what they can do to fortify the claim over the Escoda Shoal. We weren't really sure how to keep the Teresa Magbanua there, and we had to turn back.
Yeah, I think, what would have, probably had the Philippines sort of thought this all the way through and done all the war gaming, it might have been able to foresee this. I think this is probably a real learning experience for the Philippine government overall, as far as, how it needs to sort of game these things out and see what the end state might end up being if they take this move or that move. You can't anticipate everything, but this is one of those things that I think, a healthy government will learn. They'll learn from this.
That is a very steep price for such a lesson, but we're
Correct.
going to have to leave that there for now. Again, thank you so much for joining us at, especially so early your time. We're going to have to leave it there. Maritime security expert Ray Powell, Director of Sea Light as well.
Always great to see you.
Well, up next, the Bureau of Customs and Agriculture Department confiscates onions, carrots, and cigarettes worth over 136 million pesos in Subic. We'll discuss this and more with BOC spokesperson attorney Vincent Philip Maronilla when the big story returns.
Welcome back. You are watching the big story here on One News.
President Bongbong Marcos vowed to step up efforts to combat online child sexual abuse. He said he felt a deep sense of shame over the continued prevalence of such crimes in the country after listening to the story of a woman who, as a child, was locked up in a bar and forced to strip dance.
I could not help but shed a tear to try to have to relive the suffering that she went through, and to think how many other children are, even as we here sit in this fancy hotel room, eating our fancy food, continuing to suffer the same fate. For the Philippines to now be considered the epicenter of, let us not shorten it into a clinical term, OSAIC. It is sexual abuse and exploitation. We must do more. For us to allow this to happen in our country brings to me an overwhelming sense of shame, because being in government, being in public service, we are not doing enough. We must do more.
Marcos was speaking at the 2024 National Summit Against Online Sexual Abuse or Exploitation of Children, or OSAIC, in Makati earlier today. OSAIC figures show that 1 in every 100 Filipino children is victimized by abuse, a statistic that President Marcos called as appalling. The majority of them are victimized or trafficked by either their parents or relatives. Worse, one study partly conducted by De La Salle University found that minors exposed to such violence in their early years grow up committing such abuse themselves and perpetuating a vicious cycle. Police say they've been able to rescue 1,099 victims from 2022 to July 2024, but the government recognizes that's just the minority. At today's event, Marcos also called on various agencies to remain committed to protecting children and vowed to strengthen the criminal justice system to make sure perpetrators pay for their crimes.
I have said it before, I will say it again. This administration will do everything. We will spare no effort to combat these heinous crimes against our children. We cannot even begin to imagine the horrors that they faced. It's not their burden to carry alone. The entire government is with you. We hold your hand and walk along the arduous path towards healing and recovery. As we were discussing many of the measures that we were trying to put into place, I reminded all the heads of the different agencies what we are trying to do here, what is the most important part of this work that we are trying to do here, is to save the child. Save that life. That should be always our primary consideration, because life, when taken away, never be returned.
Well, President Marcos also called on the public to do their part, saying everyone should, quote, be suspicious, be watchful, and report even the slightest inkling of abuse. The number to call is 1383 for the Makabata helpline, which is run by the Council for the Welfare of Children.
Another issue the government is struggling to contain: smuggling. The Bureau of Customs and the Department of Agriculture intercepted smuggled products worth almost 137 million pesos in Subic Port last week. The items were packed in 7 separate containers and were declared as frozen fish egg balls and tissue, when in fact they were carrots and fresh white onions and cigarettes. 2 consignees signed for the shipment, and now the DA is checking if they've been involved in other smuggling activities. Both are in violation of the Tariffs Act, licensing and sanitary requirements, among several charges. The government has estimated it is losing billions of pesos in revenue to smuggling, as much as 250 billion pesos in any given year. In fact, now that's according to estimates of the Federation of Philippine Industries. Who was behind this latest shipment, and what will it take to finally curb smuggling? Let me throw that question tonight to Bureau of Customs spokesperson Attorney Vincent Philip Maronilla. Welcome to the Big Story, Attorney.
Good evening, ladies, and good evening to all those who are watching your show.
Okay, Attorney, give us a sense of how the smuggling issue is now, how grave it is, because I believe the president already put his foot down in the past State of the Nation addresses. So kamusta po yung sitwasyon po ngayon? What are the trends when it comes to the smuggling of agricultural products?
Well, we're still experiencing some unscrupulous importers who are using the scheme of misdeclaration. This is what happened here in this instance. They declared this as some other items. As you reported, they declared this as tissue. But actually it contained other items, no? Other illegal items. So there were carrots, white onions, other frozen agricultural products such as fish ball, and of course, we also discovered 2 containers of illicit cigarettes. That has been the usual scheme that was being used in the past. So that's why we've been ramping up our operations and trying to profile each and every importer that are usually suspected of might have some traces of doing this kind of scheme. More than that, there are other schemes that we're guarding against. No? In the past years, there's been an increase in outright smuggling, which are smuggling in the high seas. So they no longer enter our ports; they enter it through private ports or some entrance in our country through the open seas. So we have memorandum of understanding and cooperation with the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy. But again, for this instance, they've used old schemes like misdeclaration to try to smuggle this into our country.
Pagkatapos po na maipasok itong mga produkto, saan po nagpupunta? Because kailangan malagay yan sa freezer, di ba? At ano po yung madalas na nakikita po ninyo na sinismuggle sa Pilipinas? Ito po yung carrots, yung white onions, cigarettes, what else?
Depende yan, Gretchen, no, sa kung ano yung mabenta sa merkado. Ganun yung naging experience namin eh. So, before, tulad itong carrots, no, kapag mabenta to sa merkado, nakikita nilang merong market talaga, no, they smuggle it. Kapag itong white onions, no, kapag medyo hindi harvest season, o kaya medyo may kakulangan sa ating merkado, ito naman ang kanilang sinasmuggle. Cigarettes, we've seen a rise nung talagang smuggling incident dyan kasi talaga nagtaas tayo ng taxes dyan, no? Yung ating reform sa ating taxes, pagdating sa sin taxes, no? Mga produktong tinatawag nating covered ng sin taxes tulad ng cigarettes, talagang ang laki nung tinaas, no? Kaya ang laki din nung magiging profit kung isa-smuggle to at hindi magbabayad ng buwis. Doon naman sa tanong, no, kung saan siya sinestore, no? Yes, pag frozen agricultural products, kailangan siyang i-store sa mga tinatawag nating refrigerated warehouses, no? O ang tawag ng pamahalaan doon, cold storages. Itong mga cold storages ito, regular din po naming sinasubject to a raid through a letter of authority coming from the Commissioner of Customs and in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture. Kasi alam namin dito sin-store. Pag naman nauhuli namin to at illegal yung item, ito po ay aming dinidestroy kasi wala po itong kaukulang permit at hindi natin may ensure na fit for human consumption.
But Attorney Marinelia, misdeclaration is an age-old tactic of the smugglers, though. They use it not just to bring in illegal agri products, but also even illegal drugs. Also, remember the artificial onion shortage from, when was it, 2022, 2023, right? This is part of what exacerbated that. Why is it so difficult to stamp out? Give us a sense of how tricky it is trying to weed out these players.
Well, you can just imagine how many containers the Bureau of Customs need to process every day. It averages to about 5,000 to 10,000 containers daily all over the Philippines that we actually process. And I guess the unscrupulous importers try to take advantage of the balancing act that we do, no, between trade facilitation and of course border protection. So siguro iniisip nila dahil hindi naman lahat yan kayang bantayan ng Bureau of Customs at kinakailangan din nilang i-facilitate yung trade, kundi maapektuhan din, no, yung mga nilalabas na shipment ng mga legitimate importers. Kapag kami naghigpit para sa lahat, they try to do it the old-fashioned way, which is misdeclaration. Tsambahan ba na merong mailusot or maisabay dun sa volume at maitago doon. No? Little that some of these unscrupulous importers have knowledge of is that niramp up na rin po ng aming intelligence and enforcement group yung capability namin to detect misdeclared shipments. In fact, we're not just relying on our own intelligence. We're using intelligence coming from source countries as well. Marami na pong pinasukan si Bureau of Customs Commissioner Bien Rubio, no, na iba't ibang memorandum of agreement, no, cooperation agreement with other countries in ASEAN and traditional trading partners natin para po magkaroon kami ng exchange of information. At pagdating pa lang sa kanila, kung medyo meron ng kaduda-dudang shipment na lumabas, may inform na kagad dito at ma-profile namin.
I see. Because it's not physically possible to board every single container that comes in every single day. And then also, as you pointed out, it's a balancing act with trade facilitation because you also can't hold the shipments too long, right?
Yes.
This
Because
latest...
if we do that, we affect the other legitimate importers who's trying to also cut costs. No, otherwise their costs are going to go up, prices are going to go up, and of course congestion in the ports might also happen.
I see. It also affects the legitimate importers, as you said, and then subsequently affecting market prices. But this latest shipment from Subic port, the one that was seized, worth 136 million pesos, where was it? Where did it come from?
The imported agricultural products such as the onions, carrots, and the frozen fish balls and other frozen products came from China. On the other hand, the cigarettes came from Taiwan.
Okay, Attorney, what do we know about these illegitimate or, as you mentioned, unscrupulous importers? Sindikato po ba talaga to? Are they an international syndicate? And how many of them or how many of these smugglers have been charged and convicted in court, if any?
But we've convicted, but in the past year, there has been conviction coming from the Bureau of Customs. So I think meron kaming a little over 5 convictions already. But there are numerous cases that are now pending before the courts and pending before the Department of Justice. Ang instruction ng commissioner namin dito is that once na mahuli to at matapos ang investigasyon, agad-agad mag-file sa DOJ. In fact, we're filing at a rate of about 3 to 4 cases every week, no, sa Department of Justice. Not just agricultural products, but other cases of smuggling as well. Now, for these types of importers, paiba-iba din sila ng modus operandi. No? Before, they would usually do consignees for hire. But when we tried na higpitan yung aming accreditation system, they would now put up legitimate companies, and some of these legitimate companies magkakaroon ng pakonti-konting legal importation, and then eventually when they get the status of legitimate importer, and historically, then they'll try to attempt bringing in paunti-unti, no, ng mga smuggled products. But again, it's all a game of intelligence, and I guess one of the reason why we're very successful in apprehending these kinds of products that we place a very competent person in our intelligence group. No, he's actually an intelligence guy coming from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and the network is there, and the capability and the qualification of the person handling our intelligence and apprehensions is actually very effective.
Isn't it possible to impose stiffer penalties and fines, or actually reveal the identity of these smugglers and those who conspire for these products to get inside the country? Di ba napag-uusapan yun?
Napag-uusapan naman. In fact, we're going to name them once we file these cases in court. We're just very careful at this stage because there are follow-up operations and follow-up investigations to get to the bottom of who's actually involved in these operations. And yes, in some instances, we found out that it's a syndicated thing. In other instances, it's really just basically money-driven. It's a profit-driven. We have a saying that money makes the world go round, and it's the same thing in smuggling. No? The profit that they actually are expected to get is the price that's actually making them attempt to smuggle these items over and over again. Try to smuggle these items over and over again.
All right, thank you for giving us a better sense, and we hope to see a better situation moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Bureau of Customs spokesperson, Attorney Vincent Philip Marunilla. Now, how does the weather look tomorrow and the coming days? Well, more rains are expected as Tropical Depression Hener is forecast to move across northern Luzon. The center of the storm was last located 290 kilometers east of Tuguegarao, Cagayan. It packs winds of up to 55 kilometers per hour, with gusts reaching 70 kilometers per hour. Hener is moving northwest at a speed of 10 kilometers per hour. Signal number 1 remains in effect for Cagayan, including the Babuyan Islands, Isabela, Quirino, Nueva Vizcaya, and Apayao. It also covers Kalinga, Abra, Ifugao, Mountain Province, and Benguet. Signal number 1 is also raised in Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, La Union, Pangasinan, and Zambales, as well as Tarlac, Nueva Ecija, Aurora, and the northern portion of Quezon, including the Polillo Islands. Hener may possibly make landfall in Isabela or Aurora before exiting the country by tomorrow night. Meanwhile, another storm in the Pacific Ocean is being monitored by Pag-asa. It has the international name Pulasan. Although it is still far at sea, it is also intensifying the habagat, which will continue to bring rain to most parts of the country.
And before we go, here is our big picture tonight. And they are worth mentioning as they had a big night at the 76th Primetime Emmy Awards. It's the cast and team behind the Japanese period drama Shogun. Aside from winning a record 18 Emmys, Shogun also had a total of 25 nominations. Now, the show's main actors also brought home their first Emmy Awards. Hiroyuki Sanada for Best Actor in a Drama Series and Anna Sawai for Best Actress. She is also the first Japanese actress to win an Emmy. Shogun was also named Best Drama Series.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't
That's
seen
good
the
to
show
see.
either.
I
but-
tried to see, but they say it's like the Asian Game of Thrones.
Okay, great. Well, I was just gonna say it's good to see a lot of Asian faces on the
I
Emmy
know.
stage, right?
The
Like the ceiling has well and truly broken, folks.
I feel accepted.
So it's not too late for you.
Oh,
No,
why not?
I just came from
If you guys are
the FIBA Hall
dreaming
of
of an-
Fame, hosting the
of an
FIBA Hall of
Emmy.
Fame.
Yeah, how about that?
It kind of made me feel proud to be an Asian.
Wow. You didn't get to meet Reggie Miller though.
I didn't.
Our-
I got to meet
our
Pedja
childhood.
Stojakovic,
Wow.
And was he nice?
Stephon Marbury, and Tim Hardaway. He was very nice. They were very nice.
Yeah, but Reggie Miller is
I know.
is an icon from our
OG.
childhood. The OG. What was it? 31? Number 31? 33. 33.
Proud to banner the Philippines though. We were showcasing this photo that won best photo in a FIBA contest last year, where a little girl was playing basketball amidst boys from Rizal, and I got to tell that story. So the Philippine story in basketball.
Very nice ending.
Well, it's always great to put the spotlight on the Philippines, but for tonight, that's our show.
And Asia, of course.
And Asia.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.